Okay, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity to join you tonight. It's not letting me switch slides.
Okay, now you should be
There
able
we
to.
go. Okay. So first, a quick disclaimer. Any of my thoughts that I share with you tonight on Freemasonry, they do not represent any lodge or Grand Lodge, and are purely those of myself. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So with that, let's strap in. I appreciate this opportunity to join you because one of the things that I've most enjoyed about joining this particular faith community is its syncretic approach. Its willingness to explore other faith traditions and have speakers from other traditions, faith and non and otherwise, to come in and speak about their views on morality, so that we can all sort of fuse them into what we are looking for and in our perfection of our own spiritual journeys. I'm here to talk to you about not a faith tradition exactly, we'll get into that, but the views of Freemasonry as a moral school and how they, in my view, parallel some of the teachings of Emmanuel Swedenborg. So with that, first I'd like to, do a quick description of what Freemasonry is for the quite literally non-initiated. Um, there are many ways to describe it. It is sometimes referred to as the gentle craft, the royal art. Um, some of the cliches that Freemasons spread are it's a brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God, a peculiar, in the sense of unique, system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, a progressive moral science. I didn't add this one to the slide, but actually a friend of mine coined one that I'm particularly fond of, a syncretic ecumenical death cult. And I'll describe to you why we go that far. But ultimately, really what we're talking about is spiritual labor with working tools. Um, the core of Freemasonry is taking the stonemasons, the operative masons, the actual stone workers who built the cathedrals, taking their tools of labor and recognizing the metaphorical values that are sort of inherent in them. This goes back to ancient times. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's a story in the book of Amos, for example, where Amos talks about being confronted by God, who stood on a wall made by a plumb line with a plumb line in his hand and judging the people of Israel against that plumb line. It's an inherent measure of virtue, verticality, to use that stonemason's tool of the plumb line in that way. The Chinese philosopher Mencius, one of the followers of Confucius in the 300s before the Common Era, was quoted as writing, "A master mason in teaching his apprentices makes use of the compasses and the square. Ye who are engaged in the pursuit of wisdom must also make use of the compasses and the square." And I show you here a graphic, an image taken from an altar at Pompeii, buried under volcanic ash since 79 CE. You see a mason's, a carpenter's plumb line and a square, working tools, a level as well, all kind of built together over a skull. That's where the death cult part comes in. Masons often use skulls as a symbol, especially at the master mason level, as a memento mori, as a reminder that we are all mortal, we are all only so much for this earth. So we owe it to ourselves and to our fellow man to try to live our best day every day, try to be our best selves every day. That's where the skull comes from. As far as modern masonry, well, our origins are lost to time. They're hazy. And there are different theories. I had the meme earlier about the Dan Brown books. But there are documents in England that have recognizable elements of Masonic ritual, at least recognizable to Masons today, that date to the 1390s. One's called the Regius poem. Modern Masonry, quote unquote modern, kind of dates itself to when four lodges, which clearly existed already, four lodges of Masons met together in London, England, to create a Grand Lodge, sort of like if four cities came together and said, let's make a state, and here's what our boundaries are going to be. And in creating that Grand Lodge, they started to regularize what ritual was going to be across those Masonic lodges. Eventually, it spread across the entire Great Britain islands. And that's the sort of form of Masonry that eventually spread around the world. So we kind of trace our birthday of modern Masonry to the 24th of June, 1717, just over 300 years ago, when that occurrence happened. 24th of June was important to them because it's the feast day of St. John the Baptist. And they wanted to bring back a tradition of having a basically Masonic party on that particular occasion. So I mentioned spiritual labor. So are we a religion? No. Another Masonic cliche is that we're religious, but not a religion. We emphasize our common humanity under each person's idea of divinity. We don't profess to have any sort of revealed word of the divine ourselves. So we're not a religion. We do require that membership is only given to those who are not atheists because we think that it's important to take your oaths to the fraternity, that your oaths mean something. And so an atheist can't do it. Your oaths are taken to a version of God, but it's your version of God. Many lodges have multiple what we call volumes of sacred law on them. Now, modern Masonry, from this English beginning in 1717, was sort of built over a Christian oeuvre. So our ritual does sometimes quote from the King James Version of the Bible, the Old Testament part of the King James Bible. Let's see, allow. Oh, sorry, I have to allow someone in there. But although the ritual quotes from it, it's really for symbolic purposes. My own lodge, Federal Lodge Number 1 here in Washington, D.C., we on the altar in the middle of our lodge at every meeting, we have the King James Version of the Bible. We also have a Holy Quran. We also have a copy of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. And other lodges, this image here is actually taken from the Scottish Rite, an appendant body of higher degree masonry here in DC, glorious building if you ever get a chance to visit. And it has a whole bunch of different volumes of sacred law from different faith traditions. So we welcome, men of good faith from all traditions. So that's my ultimate argument, is that Masonry, it's not a religion, it's not a church, but it's a school of morality. We're not just a dinner club. We're profoundly philosophical, spiritual, if you approach us in the right way. We use our working tools in order to symbolize other values, metaphorical values. But our lectures, when we give you a degree, also very specifically call out various principles of ethics that we seek to inculcate into our members. This word cloud here I generated by taking basically the parts of our entered apprentice degree lecture that are not secret, quote unquote, and just dumping them into a word cloud generator and asking it to stick them into the form of a skull. And look at the words that pop out at you, other than masonry, which is the biggest one: truth, assist, aid, charity, relief. These are all the kinds of things that we are trying to inculcate in our members. So to start to transition to the real meat of the topic at hand, given that he lived as a contemporary to some of the men who actually founded the modern school of Masonry, there's a natural question: was Swedenborg himself a Mason? It's unclear. There are inconsistent reports. There was a book, copy of which is shown there, by an author with questionable Masonic credentials named Samuel Beswick, who in 1870 went through his research and suggested that Swedenborg actually did join Masonry when he was a young man, only 18 in 1706, but there aren't any records that really confirm it. There's also a lot of confusion because he supposedly, according to Beswick, joined Masonry at a lodge in Lund, Sweden. But there are some authors who say that he joined in London. But he didn't visit London until 1710, not 1706, and it may have been just a sort of mistranslation kind of thing, given the similarity of the names. There isn't really documentation that Masonry in its current form from English or Scottish lodges actually was introduced into Sweden until the 1730s. So there's a lot of confusion there. It's also a little incongruous to think that Swedenborg was a Mason, given that he never mentions it. And those of us who have just started to, or certainly are more experienced in studying Emmanuel Swedenborg, know that he's nothing if not chatty. He's a prolific writer, but he never mentions it. Beswick takes a lot of out of a particular letter that Swedenborg apparently wrote to a brother of his, blood brother, um, during some travels. I excerpt some of it here. I only came here today. I might easily have arrived yesterday had it not been for the darkness and uncertainty of finding quarters with someone in a blue dress. Now, it's a little odd to think of, a Scandinavian, especially of that era, saying, I was looking for, a place to stay and needed someone in a blue dress. It almost seems racy, right? Even today. Um, Beswick takes a lot out of that and says that it's basically a covert reference to Masonry. Someone in a blue dress, meaning someone from a blue lodge. Blue is a color associated with Masonry. We call our lodges blue lodges, craft lodges, because often we paint the ceilings blue to resemble the canopy of heaven. So blue being a color associated with Masonry is sort of a lot of weight is put on that odd phrase. That said, even if Swedenborg did join Masonry at some point when he was a young man, this is long before he started having his spiritual revelations, and he may have just abandoned it. Nevertheless, his writings would eventually have a lot of impact on Freemasons. He certainly had Masons, Rosicrucians, other Christian spiritualists in his circle of acquaintance. He would keep up with them throughout his life. This is not uncommon in that era among leading thinkers. And some eventually actually created a whole rite of Freemasonry built on his particular writings. It was not uncommon in that era for people to say, look, if you're already a Freemason, and you've gotten those three degrees, entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason, you know what? You might enjoy these other moral teachings. So we're going to build some additional degrees, and we're going to have a whole other school of Masonry that builds on that. Some of them exist to this day, the Scottish Rite, the Royal Arch of Masonry, Cryptic Council, Knights Templar. I'm a member of some of these that exist to this day, but others just sort of withered over time. One of those was the Swedenborgian Rite of Freemasonry. In the first instance, in the early 1700s, a former Benedictine monk, actually, who was a Freemason, created a whole other branch of Freemasonry with three additional degrees on top of the original ones to elaborate on the Masonic teachings and use Swedenborg's approach to biblical exegesis, biblical analysis, to provide additional moral teachings and to say that the lodge room itself has a relationship with heaven. And eventually, that died after about 10 years. It came back in a different form with Beswick, actually, who made himself Grand Master of this whole new branch of Freemasonry. But that didn't last very long into the 20th century before it died too. But one of the things that most appealed to them about Swedenborg's philosophy was his doctrine of correspondences. A more ancient way, hermetic way of putting it is as above, so below. Everything on earth is a reflection of the more perfect version of it that exists in heaven, a Neoplatonic idea as well. And that's what these rites were really going for. So to really dive in, what are we talking about in terms of how we compare how Masonry looks at the classical virtues versus how Swedenborg does? Well, Masonry does specifically, as early as the entered apprentice, the first degree of Masonry, tell its initiates that we seek to inculcate in them the theological virtues, the classical theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, and the cardinal virtues of temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. This is a lovely fresco by Raphael, by the way, that has symbolism connecting to all seven. You actually don't see justice. She's off in the corner, but this is a Masonic tracing board. It's a tool that Masons use in order to help teach other Masons how to remember the lessons we give them when they go through their degrees and the lessons in the lectures that we provide to them. It's crammed full of symbols, working tools, columns, different things in heaven that all symbolize things. I'm giving it to you because I want to blow up this one from the center where you have this particular bit, all good Masons hope at last to arrive in heaven by the aid of that theological ladder, the three principal, uh, rungs of which, there we go, are faith, hope, and charity. That comes from, again, a non-secret part of our ritual. Quick interjection. We're often called a secret society. We're not. I mean, I'm right here saying, hey, I'm a Mason. Our buildings have squares and compasses on them. We're only a society that has some secrets in the same way as you need a passcode in order to get into this building. Doesn't make this church a secret society that you need a pin in order to know how to get in or a key. That is what we're talking about, is that these parts of our lectures are not secret at all, and you can find them anywhere. So to go into those virtues, the theological ones, Masonry, and I will shortly argue Swedenborg, say that they're intertwined. And what's more, we always emphasize the last one. The greatest of these, quoting from Corinthians, the reading we had earlier, is charity. For our faith may be lost in sight, hope ends in fruition, but charity extends beyond the grave through the boundless realms of eternity. Charity, again, is sometimes mistranslated. It's better translated from the Greek in the Bible as love often. But when specifically charity is talked about in these operative terms and these active terms, I would argue it's because you're operationalizing love. You're doing something as a result of your love. And that's what lives beyond the grave, because you've done something for another person. What does Masonry say? Our Grand Lodge in DC in our ritual very plainly says, have faith in God. What does Swedenborg say? Good works are not produced by charity alone, still less by faith alone, but by charity and faith together, because faith is truth, and these illuminate charity and its exercises. Hope is tricky. Reverend Rich knows this because I struggled with this and asked for his counsel on this one. Quick peek behind the curtain. When I was preparing this presentation, at one point I had a copy, electronic copy of Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell open. And I did a quick just word search. I was looking for a juicy quote to give you for each of these virtues. And I searched for faith. I searched for faith and saw the little Adobe counter ticking up. Quick, 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 quick. Finally got to like 1200-ish. This is a 650-page book, one of his smaller, but still, that's a lot. And then I looked for charity. I looked for love. Over 1,000 mentions for each one. So on average, faith, charity, love, some variation of those terms came up twice a page in this very long work. I looked for hope. Blink, 4. Four uses of the word hope. Swedenborg doesn't, and one of them was a quote from the Old Testament about the hope of Israel. Swedenborg doesn't really talk about hope in the way that you would think, given its prominence in most Christian theology as faith, hope, and charity, kind of a big triumvirate there. He treats hope not really as an independent virtue, but more as a faith that, again, have to kind of mix the terms, that divine providence will bolster us, that we have hope, we will have hope because God will give it to us so that we can continue our journey in doing good works that are basically the marriage of faith and charity, faith and love. Um, and I will welcome comments from Reverend Rich about this at the end, because this is a very complicated thing. But he really does sublimate hope as its own thing. The best quote that I found of Swedenborg to this point is this one from Secrets of Heaven, Arcana Celestia. The evil spirits who induce temptation strongly inspire negation. But the good spirits keep the man in a state of hope, and at last confirm him in what is affirmative. Cheered by hope, he stands fast in what is affirmative. That is the best that I could find about hope from Swedenborg. And it's ironic that the virtue he speaks about the least is going to elicit the most comment. Charity or love. The ritual of Masons in DC just blatantly says, have charity towards all mankind. Um, Again, Swedenborg, his emphasis is on marrying it to faith for good works. Freemasonry, this is actually some more masonry here, from a pamphlet that's been issued for 100 years from an organization, the Masonic Service Association of North America. It was unsigned, but at this period, and you start to get used to someone's writing, I'm pretty sure that this was by a Masonic author, ordained minister, Reverend Brother Joseph Fort Newton, wonderful writer. Freemasonry not only inculcates the principles of love and benevolence, it seeks to give them actual and living presence. It not only feels, it acts. It not only pities human suffering, it relieves it. Swedenborg, again, linking faith and charity as needing a fusion to give each other expression, writes in Heaven and Hell, a life of piety separated from a life of charity is of no avail, but united with charity, it is profitable for all things. Charity to the neighbor consists in doing what is good, just, and right in every work and in every employment. A life of charity is a life in accordance with the Lord's commandments. So now we move from the theological to the classical cardinal virtues: temperance, prudence, fortitude, and justice. Here I want to flip things and start with Swedenborg, because he has this lovely bit where he actually talks about all of them, keeping in mind that this is being translated, and not even from Swedish, from Latin. Nevertheless, the synonyms are there. Who loves a person? And so I would also add to the start, this is kind of saying, like, what makes you lovable? What, Swedenborg is not one to say that anyone is not deserving of love, but what makes you most worthy, perhaps, is a better way of putting it. Who loves a person except from the quality of his will? You might say fortitude. And understanding, you might say prudence. That is from what is good, prudence, and just in him. Who loves a king or any magistrate except for the judgment from which they act and speak? Temperance. Who loves the general of an army except for bravery, fortitude, combined with prudence? So what does Masonry say? Well, in our lecture, we, at the very entered apprentice level, we say temperance is that due restraint upon our affections and passions, which renders the body tame and governable and frees the mind from the allurements of vice. Avoid excess or contracting any licentious or vicious habit. Kevin in the room smiled to see the tarot card there.
Yes.
I'm going to go with tarot for the whole cardinal virtues segment. Prudence regulates our lives and actions to the dictates of reason, and wisely judge and prudentially determine on all things. Notice that they link together. Fortitude, that noble and steady purpose of mind whereby we're enabled to undergo any pain, peril, or danger when prudentially deemed expedient. This virtue is equally distant from rashness and cowardice. Note the call for balance between rashness and cowardice. That's where fortitude exists. And then justice, lording it over all of them. To render to every man his just due, without distinction. This virtue is not only consistent with divine and human laws, but is the very cement and support of civil society. Justice, in a great measure, constitutes the real good man. So should it be the invariable practice of every Mason, never to deviate from the minutest principles thereof. A very important Masonic symbol is the level, the carpenter's level, the Mason's level, that shows that things are even and flat. And Masons use it to symbolize our commitment to treating everyone equally, to egalitarianism. So where ultimately does that leave us? Well, there was eventually a Swedenborgian rite of Masonry. It's pretty much defunct now. The ritual still exists for people to explore in other bodies of Masonry that kind of do that, Masonic archaeology, if you will. And a lot of the Masons who created those rites either went back into Rosicrucianism. Some of them went on to found other orders, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Some just focused on mainstream Masonry or explicitly Christian mystic orders like Martinism. But ultimately, the longing to apply Swedenborg's theology to this progressive moral science lives on because it is so resonant with it and it fits so well. And it's one of the reasons that I joined the Church of the Holy City. As above, so below. So have a couple quick pages of slides. If anyone wants sources, I'm happy to share them. Otherwise, happy to open up for any discussion.